After an in-depth analysis of the assignment at hand, to begin our design journey, we created a timeline in order to organise and visualise all of the tasks we had to create together as a group. Next, we created a mood board to gain some inspiration for our zines as well as the book cover and respective poster. In order to ensure our mood board was accurate, we all wrote a blurb about the novel and also investigated the current themes existing for the novel. It was evident that most of the existing book covers utilised blue as it's based around the ocean, and also featured illustrations of Blueback, the large blue groper fish who is a central figure in the novel. For our pieces, especially the book cover and poster, we wanted to stay aligned with this theme as Blueback is based around the ocean. After some rough first draft sketches we all did individually for the book cover, we compared each other's to see what would be the most suitable to expand on. We all decided on Kyle's sketch as it had the perfect balance between simplicity, delivering appropriate illustrations that kept within the novel's theme, and not conveying too much information to keep the viewer asking questions. We wanted to give Kyle's design for the book cover a collage texture and appearance. We decided to experiment with collage as the primary demographic the book is targeted towards are children an age where collage, creativity, and image making are commonly seen. As the novel is advertised as a fable for all ages, collage also felt suitable for a broader audience as it doesn't come off as too childish. We used a combination of cartridge paper as well as acrylic paint to colour the pieces of paper to be used in the collage. Light and dark blue as well as orange were used as the paint's colours. The larger pages were then torn up into pieces. Long pieces of the orange painted paper were glued along the bottom of the page to illustrate the ocean's floor. Next, little pieces of the dark blue paper were positioned appropriately to form the basic shape of a large fish. The fish's tail was also positioned accordingly at the other end of the canvas paper. Once we were happy with the shape, the blue pieces of paper were glued into place. To finish off the book cover, Photoshop was primarily used. An image of the recently created collage was taken and then imported into an A4 sized Photoshop canvas with a resolution of 300, the most appropriate resolution used for objects that are going to be printed. The pen tool along with the magic eraser was then used to cut out Blueback as well as the sand. To increase the rustic and collage vibe of the cover, a distinct tear in the sandpaper was kept visible at the very bottom of the canvas. Following this, we weren't too sure on what fonts to specifically use, however we did want to keep in touch with the oceanic theme. Eventually the font by the name of Seattle Avenue was chosen, as it represented the waviness of the ocean and also gave the impression that it was handwritten, giving the cover some distinct personalization. For the author's name as well as the blurb, we wanted a more serious font. For this we wanted to use a serif font to give the cover a more robust classic feeling. We then decided to use Libar Baskerville after some experimentation. For the background colour, we originally experimented with plain white, however the tutor suggested not to as it was too basic. Following this, we tried a grey, however this wasn't suitable either as it didn't contrast well against the blue font and made the cover appear very dull. Next we tried gradients using blue and white. After compiling some examples, we decided to all vote on the one we thought was most suitable. The gradient with a little white at the top, which progressively became a darker blue the further down the page it went, was chosen as it was the most realistic by representing the abundance of sunlight at the top of the ocean, which eventually becomes less the further down you go. This was the end result. For Katie's section of the zine, she chose to include most of the hand-drawn elements, which were then edited on the computer to create her zine page. Katie's zine focuses on the quote on page 119 of Blueback, which says, "A month later, an oil tanker cracked in two off Longboat Bay. He saw pictures of the oil spreading." Katie felt like this was a great quote that captured the looming fear that Abel was feeling as he saw his homeland being slowly destroyed by pollution. Using a combination of pencil drawing techniques used in class and prior graphic design knowledge, she created a work representing the oil spreading from the tanker described in the quote. Droplets of silken fabric were used to represent the oil spilling into the bay, as well as a skull to represent the death it brings to nature. A combination of colouring effects and electronic brushes were used to create the background for the typography and other visual elements to achieve a dark, aquatic landscape representing what Abel's home is turning into. A collage style layout was chosen to increase the sense of authenticity in the design and to connect the viewer with the artistic style seen in both the book cover and poster. Katie also chose this quote as it ties into environmental issues we are currently facing in the world, and she feels like these issues should be at the front end of everybody's mind. Tim Winton's book is an excellent story that highlights how humans can help save the environment by trying to live in tune with the world around them instead of constantly taking. This is what drew Katie to choose to work on this book in the first place. For Brenton's section of the zine, a creative approach was taken in regard to the following quote taken from page 66 of the novel. He stayed just behind the breakers and was showered with their spray, and saw the great strange land through the wobbly glass of the waves. He saw the sun melting like butter on white dunes. The image was created using shaving cream and acrylic paints. To begin the process, a large tray was filled with the shaving cream and was then lightly mixed with 2 shades of blue, yellow, gold, and lastly white. Next, a piece of paper was lightly placed over the top of the cream and left for 30 seconds. Afterwards, the page was removed and all the excess cream was scraped off. It took multiple attempts for Brenton to perfect the design, as the yellow and blue would sometimes mix, which created an undesirable green hue, which was printed on the paper. Afterwards, in Photoshop, the hue and saturation tool were used to increase the vibrancy of the colours, and a few blemishes were removed using the spot healing brush. Finally, the line tool and the type tool were used to create the curvy writing seen on the right hand side of the zine spread. For George's zine, she decided to use watercolour and collage. She painted the background with blue, purple and green watercolours to give it an oceanic colour representing the ocean of Longboat Bay. She then got a new piece of canvas paper and painted it blue. She then tore it up into little pieces to glue onto the oceanic background, making a collage blueback. She then used some white watercolour to give the fish some white spots on the bottom half of its body. After this, she scanned the image and opened it up in Photoshop. She used Seattle Avenue as the font for a quote to keep consistency with the book cover. For my zine, I wanted to capture Abel, the central protagonist of the book, and his relationship with Blueback, the massive grouper fish, in a simple yet easy to interpret image. To begin my experimentation, I decided to use watercolours to practice my painting techniques and to find the perfect combination of colours. To start, I used a blue watercolour to experiment with some different patterns. I wanted to give my groper an additional colour to add some further contrast. After some more experimentation, I decided to choose purple as it complemented the blue very well. Following this, I combined both the colours in some further experimentation. Next, I began some attempts and brainstorming about the shape I wanted to make Blueback. Following my initial groper drawings, I then decided on 2 designs I felt were the best to take further. I used the combination of the blue and purple watercolours to give the groper images their colour. For the image of Abel, I wanted to illustrate him sitting on the edge of a jetty with his legs in the water. After a brief practice design sketch, I implemented him on the edge of a jetty and also drew the groper in the top left of the canvas. After I completed my design and painted it, I wasn't entirely happy with it as it felt too basic. To expand further, I decided to take a picture of the image and take it into Photoshop. First, I cut out Blueback using the pen tool and used the replace colour tool to change the cream colour of the paper to a bluish hue and also turn up the lightness. I then used a combination of grunge brushes with green and blue colours to illustrate the water as well as the splashes around Blueback. Next, I also cut out Abel and the jetty he was sitting on. I then used the hue and saturation tool to turn up the lightness of the image to change the cream tone of the paper to plain white. I then used the grunge brushes as well as a pastel brush to implement the green and blue hues around the canvas. Next, I created another Photoshop document the same size as the zine and positioned 3 images, one of an old diving helmet, a snorkel and a life-saving ring around it. I then used the channels tab for each of the images to find which channel had the best contrast. I then chose these channels and then duplicated them so that there was only one channel for each image left. I then set a Gaussian blur on top of the image to make it less coarse. Next, I went back to my original zine document and added a displacement map which warped the blue and green colours around the objects. Finally, I added some text to the bottom right of the canvas using the same font from the book cover and poster, and then I used Railway Light as the font for the author's name. Kyle's scene was also based off a quote from page 72 of the novel. The deck of Costello's boat was awash with blood. Abel had spewed fish nearly every day, but had never seen slaughter such as this. Costello from the novel is portrayed as a selfish character who is harvesting all of the abalone from Longboat Bay. The quote references when Abel discovers Costello's boat and is instantly filled with horror and disgust about the destruction and devastation he has caused. Kyle's scene utilised red paint dripping down from the top into a blue painted canvas. This illustrates the blood flowing off the boat and into the water. Kyle also hand drew the text instead of using a font in Photoshop to make it appear as though the text was drawn with blood. This intensifies the horrific vibe of the quote and adds to the zine overall. For our group's poster to promote the book, we all decided to once again do our own individual designs, similar to how we executed the book cover. Once we were completed, we compared each other's and all agreed to utilise Katie's design because we believed that the vertical position of the beach next to the ocean made for a very unique and eye-catching background. After this, further research was conducted in order to find the specific colours to be used. We decided to once again take a look at the different versions of current Blueback book covers to see what type of colours they utilised. Once we were set on the colours, brushes in Photoshop were used to create the watercolour styled background. The use of layered brushes over the top of one another were used to create a dappled effect in the water, representing the differing depths as it got further away from the shore. White was also added and then erased carefully so that it looked as though it was foaming just along the edge of the waves rolling into the shore. Additional typography as well as the book cover were added to act as promotional signposts for Tim Winton's book. The two fonts Seattle Avenue and Libre Baskerville were once again utilised in the poster to keep consistency with the book cover. In the end, the poster's watercolour style background complemented the design and colours of the background of the book cover and also allows the viewer to connect with the landscape constantly described in the book before they even read it.